I never thought the moment that marked the end of a life would take place amid the soft music of a family dinner. The smell of barbecue, the sound of laughter, and the floral dress I wore that day, all are still fresh in my memory. But what sticks out most are my mother's words. Cut through the kitchen door like a cold knife, Rachel is the dreamer, and Madison is the realist. She deserves Eric better. I stood frozen in the doorway, still holding the soda Eric had given me a few minutes ago. He'd said he was going to get another drink, and now he was standing in the kitchen, facing my mother, not arguing, not panicking, just listening silently as she explained why my sister was the one for him. I stepped back, my heart racing. My mind whispered, I misheard. But my heart knew it was all true. The unanswered questions of the past weeks, the strange calls, the unexplained cancellations, the way Madison looked at Eric at dinner, all fell together like puzzle pieces, building a picture of betrayal I never dared to imagine. I retreated from the party like a shadow, my lips still smiling mechanically. My mother had no idea that I had heard, and Eric continued to play the role of the thoughtful boyfriend, asking if I was happy, if I wanted more soda. I said nothing, not because I didn't want to, but because the pain was too great, making me speechless. For the next 3 weeks, I tried to convince myself that it was just my mother's careless words. I told myself that Eric loved me 3 years of love that couldn't be shaken by a conservative mother's advice. But as he started talking more about Madison, about her newfound success at the law firm, about how smart and sharp she was, I knew I was lost. Not because I wasn't good enough, but because, in their eyes, my gentleness and passion for painting weren't assets. They were weaknesses. Then one Saturday, I brought toast and 2 concert tickets to Eric's apartment. We'd discussed seeing this band, his favorite band in college. I used the private key he'd given me and walked in as usual. But instead of music and the smell of coffee, I found the apartment unusually quiet, a beige robe draped over a chair. At first, I thought it looked familiar until I realized it belonged to Madison. I walked to the bedroom. The door was ajar. A soft laugh drifted in. And then, Eric's voice whispered, "You should go before she gets here." Madison's voice answered, light as air. She won't suspect a thing. I didn't need to open the door. I didn't need to see. I just needed to see the familiar pair of high heels lying at the foot of the bed. The silk dress I had seen her wearing at a council meeting. I gently placed the 2 tickets on the table by the window and quietly turned away. When Eric called me the next morning, I didn't pick up. When my mother came to find me, her face eerily calm, saying, "Love is a fragile thing. Don't blame anyone," I realized that I didn't want to stay here anymore. In the house where I grew up, love was conditional, an exchange, not a safe haven. That night, I packed what I could into my old Corolla, a few clothes, a box of watercolors, a few unfinished drawings. I left a note on the bathroom mirror. "Don't wait for me. I'll be fine. But don't call me unless you're ready to see me for who I really am." No tears, no anger, just a broken heart, but one that was beginning to piece itself back together. I stepped on the gas and drove through the night, north toward Chicago. I didn't know what the future held. I only knew that Charlotte, along with the people who had looked down on me, was no longer home. As I crossed the first state, it was 1:43 a.m. The old Fleetwood Mac song came on the radio. "You can go your own way." I smiled for the first time in weeks. I may have lost the people I loved, the trust of my family, and the familiarity, But I never lost myself. And that will be a new beginning. A beginning of my own, without anyone's permission. I arrived in Chicago on a gloomy afternoon in late March, carrying 2 old suitcases, a bag of art supplies, and a broken pride. The city was a silent person, welcoming me not with warm sunshine or flowers, but with a wind blowing through my tangled hair and a chill that bit down to my spine. But strangely, the air made me feel forgiven. It was as if Chicago was saying to me, "Welcome, Rachel. Here. No one knows that your mother betrayed you." The tiny Airbnb I rented in Uptown was cramped and smelled like the musty, stale smell of someone else's dream. But it was mine, even if only for 30 days. I set down my suitcase and stood in the empty room, the light streaming through the windows, painting the silhouette of a woman learning to stand on her own. On the first day, I walked around the neighborhood looking for a coffee shop with stable Wi-Fi. Every help wanted sign made my heart beat a little faster. I was no longer the artist girl sitting in a coffee shop drawing portraits for fun. I was an unemployed woman, homeless if I couldn't find a job after 30 days. In my worn brown leather backpack, I keep an old portfolio, a few pencil drawings, some posters from Charlotte exhibitions, and a regionally awarded portrait. I carry it like I carry myself, fragile but not quite dead. On the 5th day, I found a temporary job at a small gallery where the owner, a middle-aged woman named Grace, asked me only one question: "Have you ever lived through pain?" When I nodded, she just smiled. "Then you know how to hang a painting so that it has soul." The gallery job didn't pay the rent, but it was a starting point. In the evenings, I applied for every administrative job I could find. I deleted degree in fine arts from my education and replaced it with gallery manager and receptionist experience. I had no idea what I was doing, but I knew I couldn't go back to Charlotte. 2 weeks later, an email came from a firm called Harrington and Lewis, inviting me to interview for an executive assistant. I knew nothing about finance, but I knew how to observe, empathize, and support skills a girl who had lived in the shadow of her lawyer sister was forced to learn. The corporate building was in the Loop, modern and cool as a minimalist painting. I stepped into the elevator, cramped in a dress borrowed from Grace, who had said, "Dress like you're an art politician." On the 13th floor, I was led to Daniel Lewis. He wasn't what I expected. Not the type of gentleman with the perfect tie and the strong smell of cologne. He was the type who forgot to shave, had dark circles under his eyes from lack of sleep, and had a stack of papers on his desk so high that it covered his computer. Daniel looked at me from behind the pile of papers. "You are Rachel? Right, I can make coffee, untangle meetings, and, if necessary, hang pictures at a 45-degree angle to cover a crack in the wall." I said. My voice shook, but my eyes did not stray from his. He chuckled. "No one ever opens like that. Sit down." We talked not as an interview, but as two people who had experienced it. He told me about his former assistant who had just quit because he was exhausted. I told him about being a gallery manager and putting together an exhibition for a week on a $200 budget. He asked me why I left Charlotte. I simply said, "Because I wasn't myself there." "I understand." Daniel nodded. As I left, I thought, like so many other interviews, this might be a short-lived hope. But exactly 3 hours later, I got an email: "Rachel, welcome to Harrington and Lewis." I cried like a baby when I read that, not because I had a job, but because for the first time in months, someone said, "We need you." The first week, I learned everything like a new recruit in the barracks. I didn't understand the terminology, but I understood the people. I realized that Daniel was a perfectionist not out of arrogance, but out of fear of failure. I rescheduled meetings so he could take a lunch break. I took notes for him during meetings with keywords that he could quickly glance at and know what to say next. We worked late into the night, ate instant noodles together, and for the first time in months, I laughed heartily. Not because Daniel was a hero who came to save me, but because with him, I felt like I was no longer defined by the mistakes of my past. 3 months later, Daniel handed me a business plan. "I want to leave this company," he said, "and I want you to come with me." I rolled my eyes. "You don't know me. I don't have an MBA. I paint portraits for hire. Remember?" He looked at me, so sincere it made me speechless. "You have intuition, honesty, and the ability to make things work. Those things can't be taught in college." That night, I walked out of the office feeling confused, but deep down, I knew I was ready. It took me 3 days to think about the offer, not because I didn't trust Daniel, but because I never thought anyone would bet their future on me. I was still the woman who had been rejected by her mother, betrayed by her lover, and judged as dreamy and weak. I had lived my whole life believing that my worth was only revealed in comparison to others, and I was always behind. But Daniel was different. He didn't see me as his assistant. He saw me as someone he could work with, think with, and lead with. His idea for a startup, a sustainable investment firm that would only work with small, socially responsible businesses, was something I'd never seen from a boss before. We started in Daniel's studio apartment in the West Loop. No office, no nameplate, no media budget, just 2 people, one full of ideas, one full of to-do lists. I became the first person he shared everything with, from strategy to financial planning. Daniel listened to every objection, every detail I gave him. He said I worked like I was building a clock patient, meticulous, never in a hurry, but always knowing when it was time to act. A month after the company Reynolds and Harper Capital began operations, we landed our first client, a bio-cleaning company in suburban Milwaukee that had been turned down by major investment firms because it wasn't profitable enough. But Daniel was different, and so was I. I prepared the presentation for Daniel with all my heart. The plan was neatly bound, with notes for the hard-to-read numbers. I wrote a little note for him by hand on each page. This page emphasizes environmental impact. Stay longer, or page 6. Ask about expansion strategy. As Daniel presented, I sat in the corner, silent, but I saw his eyes as he glanced over my prepared notes and nodded. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't just behind the spotlight, I was the guiding light. The first deal was a ripple in a still pond. The second client came by referral. Then the third. Each said the same thing. "You made us feel important." My life changed in ways I could never have predicted. I went from sleeping on my friend's couch to moving into the small apartment next to Daniel's. Not because we were dating, at least I didn't think so at the time, but because he said, "We're working 14-hour days. At least you should have a hot meal and a real bed." We became an odd team. Daniel, who spoke finance more fluently than English. Me, who coordinated everything from spreadsheets to sealing envelopes. We shared not only the work, but also the comfortable silences, the late dinners, the tired laughter, the moments when we looked at each other and knew I am not alone. One night, while I was sorting through my paperwork, Daniel stood behind me, holding 2 mugs of hot cocoa. "You know what?" He handed me a cup. "No one has ever made me feel calm enough to build something lasting like this." I was silent, because I understood. Love doesn't always begin with a kiss. Sometimes, it begins with a feeling of security. A month later, we officially moved into our first office, a small space on the 3rd floor of an old building in River North. Broken glass doors, second-hand wooden desks. But to me, It was a palace. And then, Daniel did the thing I least expected. One Friday night, when we were the last ones left in the office, he pulled me out onto the balcony to look down at the passing cars. "Rachel," he said, his voice slow, "I want you to be my official partner." I turned back. "Are you sure I couldn't do this without you? Not just because you're good, but because I believe in you." For the first time, I didn't doubt. I didn't ask. "Am I worthy?" I just smiled and nodded. "Then, I stay," I said. "Not as an assistant, as a co-founder?" Daniel held out his hand. "Welcome home." That night, I went back to my new apartment, and for the first time in years, I hung up the portrait I had painted in Charlotte. It was black and white, eyes staring into the distance, lips pursed. I looked at it and whispered, "She didn't disappear. She was just waiting to be chosen again. And I chose her." I don't know why I opened my email at 10 that night. I should have gone to bed after a long day of negotiating a deal with a green tech startup in Denver. Daniel had been asleep since 9, exhausted from the flight. The apartment was quiet, save for the distant sound of cars on Michigan Avenue. And then, the headline appeared like a ghost subject: RE Partnership Inquiry, Meridian Legal Affairs. I clicked, and my world tilted slightly. "Dear Ms. Harper, I'm reaching out on behalf of Meridian Legal Affairs. We are currently restructuring our compliance partnerships in the Midwest region and are exploring a potential integration with Reynolds and Harper Capital for a long-term advisory role. Our lead on this restructuring is Mr. Eric Bennett, our Senior Compliance Officer, who will be reaching out directly within the next week. We're looking forward to the opportunity. Best regards, Samantha Greer, Strategic Relations, Meridian Group." I read the name over and over again. Eric Bennett. The man who held my hand for 3 years. The man who silently let my mother push me away from his heart and into my sister's arms. I don't shake. I don't scream. I don't cry. I just stood up, poured a glass of water, drank it all in one gulp, then turned on my computer and researched Meridian Group. It took only 5 minutes to confirm headquarters in Philadelphia, newly expanded Midwest office 6 months ago. And yes, Eric Bennett, Senior Compliance Officer, moved to Chicago less than 3 weeks ago. I leaned back in my chair, my back against the cool leather, and stared at the ceiling. 8 years. 8 years since I'd walked out of Charlotte with 2 suitcases and a broken heart. And now, with a company, a partner, a new life, the past was knocking on my door. The next morning, Daniel found me sitting silently with a cup of cold coffee. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Still sleepy?" I showed him the email. He read it slowly, word by word. When he got to Mr. Eric Bennett, he simply asked, "Is that him?" I nodded, and to my surprise, Daniel chuckled. Either the universe has a sense of humor, or I'm about to have the biggest test of my life. I didn't want to face him. I admitted, I thought I was over him, but just reading his name makes my heart clench. Daniel put his arm around my shoulder. "Then don't let him see you shaking. You're not the girl you used to be. Rachel, you built this empire. You have a choice." I took a deep breath. If he sends me the date, I'll go. The meeting took place a week later. It was in a swanky cafe on the ground floor of the Peninsula Hotel, where Meridian often meets potential clients. I was wearing a charcoal blazer that Daniel liked, like the CEO of a sustainable investment fund. He had said. I was on time. And so was Eric. I recognized him immediately. His hair was slightly gray at the temples. His face was familiar, but lacking the old smugness. When he saw me, his expression changed in an instant surprise, then confusion, then trying to look professional. "Rachel," he said, standing up and holding out his hand. "Long time no see." I shook his hand. "Eric, it really is a small world." We sat down. I didn't look at his hands, didn't notice his watch, didn't ask about his wife, my sister. I just waited for him to get to work. "Reynolds and Harper is the frontrunner for Meridian's new strategic advisory role," he said. "We are impressed with their sustainable approach and growth track record." "Thanks," I said, my voice calm. "We built that from scratch." I saw his throat tighten. He knew I was talking more than numbers. "How is Madison?" I asked, not because I wanted to, but because I chose to. Eric looked at me for a moment. "She's still in Philadelphia. We got divorced last year." I nodded. Didn't say I know, even though Jamie had told me 6 months ago. I didn't ask why. No need. "And your mother?" he asked, his voice slow. I laughed. "Still live in Charlotte. Still think law is the only profession worth being proud of." Silence fell over the table for a few seconds. "Rachel," Eric began. I raised my hand slightly, cutting him off. "I know what you mean. But honestly, Eric, I don't need an apology." He looked at me as if he didn't understand. "I had 8 years to heal," I said. "And in those 8 years, I built a life that no longer included you." Eric bowed his head. Then he smiled sadly. "I'm happy for you. You really did it." I said nothing, because I knew. I was happy for myself. And because, for the first time, I saw in his eyes no longer pity or effort to regain trust. Only recognition. We talked business for the next 30 minutes. Professional, clear. When it was over, I stood up and shook hands again. "We'll take a look," I said. "If it's a good fit, I'll send you a proposal." As I walked out of the coffee shop, I didn't look back. But I knew he was watching me. And for the first time in 8 years, I no longer walked like a fugitive. I walk away a victor. Not because I got my revenge, but because I don't need revenge anymore. That afternoon, when I walked out of the meeting with Meridian, I didn't run back to tell Daniel. I didn't dive into writing a proposal like I usually do. I just walked alone amidst the skyscrapers of Chicago, a place that once overwhelmed me with loneliness, now felt familiar. I walked quietly along Lake Michigan, the sound of the waves lapping softly in my ears, and in an unexpected moment, I burst into tears. Not because of sadness, but because of relief. I realized that meeting Eric was no longer painful. It was like closing a door that had been closed for a long time. I no longer needed validation from him, from Madison, or even from my mother. I have myself. That night, Daniel found me sitting in the kitchen, a glass of white wine in my hand, my eyes red. "Are you okay?" he asked. Walking in, I nodded. I think I just let the past go. He said nothing. He just pulled out a chair and sat down across from me. Between us, there was no need for many words. A week later, I received an invitation from my mother, a white card, bold print, "Happy 65th birthday to Deborah Harper, Charlotte, North Carolina. Below, family is waiting for you to come home." I took the card, looking at it like it was a strange object. There was no apology, no personal statement, just an invitation. Daniel saw me holding the card and glanced over. "Do you want to go?" I was silent for a moment. Then I said slowly, "I don't want to, but I have to." 2 weeks later, I returned to Charlotte, the place I left with a deep hole in my heart. Now I come back, not to reclaim anything, but to put it down, for the last time. I went with Daniel. He wouldn't let me go alone. "It's not because you're weak," he said. "It's because every warrior deserves someone to stand by their side." The party was held at a small resort, not far from my old house. My mother was still the same, slim, with neatly dyed silver hair, a smile as cold as each clean cut. When I walked in, she saw me first. For a second, I saw her eyes falter. Then the smile appeared as faint as cold tea. "Rachel," she said. "Long time no see." "Yes," I replied, looking straight ahead. 8 years. We don't hug. No need. Madison was there too. She was wearing a red dress, the color my mother always said was powerful. She didn't look at me until I was standing in front of her. "Madison," I said, nodding slightly. "Rachel," she replied, not smiling. "I hear you. Run the company with Patrick Reynolds." I chuckled. "You heard right." She started to say something more, but stopped. She stepped back, disappearing into the crowd. I don't remember much of what happened at the party. Relatives asked questions. Old friends looked at me strangely. Someone blurted out, "You're the one who studied art back then, right?" I just smiled. "Now I work in sustainable financial investment, but I still draw when I can." My mother remained silent for most of the party. Near the end, she came over to me and handed me a glass of wine. "You have changed a lot," she said. I took a sip. "No. I'm just living the part of me that you denied me." She looked at me. "I thought you would come back, weak, asking for help." I put my glass down. "You're right. I almost did. But then I remembered. There's a part of me that no one can touch. And I used it to get up." She was silent for a long moment. Then she said softly, "Maybe I was wrong." I said nothing, because I didn't need her to say it. I learned to forgive without apologizing. I learned to give myself credit. The party ended. Before leaving, I turned back to look at the room one last time, like looking back at an old page. "Thank you for ever existing." Then I folded it. Back in Chicago, Daniel and I received the news Reynolds and Harper had been named Meridian's official consulting partner. This time, no one else signed the contract, but Eric himself. I signed the contract without shaking hands, without bitterness, without gloating, just calm. Because now, I don't need to win. I just need to be myself. And that is victory. 6 months later, I was invited to speak at a national investment conference on the topic Leadership and Redemption. I stepped onto the podium, the light shining directly on my face. There was no one behind me to pull me down. I start with my story. I talk about being underestimated, being replaced, being at the bottom. Then I told how I rebuilt everything, not with anger, but with faith. Into yourself, into life, into the fact that sometimes what is rejected is a gift in disguise. When I finished, the audience stood up and applauded. And I know, this time, no one clapped in grief. They clapped because they saw themselves in me. That night, Daniel and I returned to our small suburban house, where we grew vegetables on weekends and planned together what no one believed was possible. Daniel hugged me from behind and whispered in my ear, "You know what? They say success is the best answer. But for me, your peace is the best answer." I smiled. I leaned my head on his chest and whispered, "I don't need to prove anything anymore. I'm home." We can't choose how others treat us, but we always have the right to choose how we bounce back from pain. Today's story isn't just about betrayal. It's about the rebirth power of a woman. When the people closest to you hurt you deeply, like your husband, and your own sister? You have two choices: fall apart or move on, becoming the version of yourself they never expected. She doesn't retaliate with bitterness. She responds with success. And sometimes, your silent forgiveness and calm gaze upon reunion is the most profound response. If you see yourself anywhere in this story, you've been overlooked. You've been replaced. You've been hurt. Remember, you still have the power to rewrite the next chapter of your life. Share in the comments what makes you the strongest after a breakup. If the story touches you, click like to support women who dare to overcome pain. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who needs the strength to move on. And remember to hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next part, where all the truth will be revealed. Because every woman deserves a fresh start in her own way.